So I want to talk a little bit about how data transformed my life. So I'm going to give a talk, and then Ryan Adams, who's actually like a real scientist and actually does like real math and work and that kind of stuff, he's going to actually give like a fairly technical talk. My talk is going to be not that technical at all, or not technical at all, but hopefully entertaining. But I'm going to talk a little bit about how data transformed my life and how I believe data scientists will one day rule the world. And I hope that one of those data scientists that's going to rule the world is here today, because then I can say I knew them when they were nothing, or just a member of this meetup. So who am I? Well, how many of you guys have seen 21 or read the book Bring Down the House? So you'll know what I like to call Hollywood magic, and I mean true Hollywood magic is how you turn an average-looking Asian American male into a dashing British white guy. Because that's what they did in the movie. I was the inspiration for the main character in the movie 21. It all started in 2001. A friend of mine by the name of Ben Mesrick was a writer, and he had written 7 novels, but it's fair to say that his career was pretty much in the shitter at that point. He had business school applications out and was contemplating not being a writer anymore. And I said to him, Ben, I have a great idea for your next book. And he says, well, what is it? And I said, well, me and my buddies from IT, we go to Vegas and we win lots of money using math to beat the casinos. And this sort of like glossy look went over his face, and he said, you know what, I don't think anyone wants to read about a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. And I said, okay. And then about 3 weeks later, I said, come to Vegas with me. And I took him out there, and I showed him what we did. And he goes, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. I got an idea. And I said, what? And he goes, we should write a book about this. And I was like, great idea, Ben. And then he went on to take me to meet his publisher, and we pitched this idea. And his publisher said, you know what, great story, probably a great Wired magazine article, but not something anyone wants to read. No one wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. And so we didn't listen to her. We wrote the book, Bringing Down the House. That was a New York Times bestseller for over 2 years. And then a guy by the name of Kevin Spacey read the book. He liked it so much that he eventually turned it into a movie called 21. 21 was #1 in the box office 2 weeks in a row, and made $150 million off a $35 million budget. So in the end, but somehow Hollywood accounting said that it was a non-profitable movie, which is like amazing about Hollywood accounting. But I guess in the end, people did want to read a book and see a movie about a bunch of MIT nerds, so that was cool because we won in the end. And what was interesting is that Ben went on to write a book called The Accidental Billionaires, which got turned into a movie called The Social Network, which won an Oscar. And I can say, and Ben went and won an Oscar, but I can say I made Ben Mesrick who he is today. So that's cool. So I'm going to talk to you guys about a few things. And like, again, this isn't going to be hard science, but I think some of these lessons, hopefully, that I'm going to talk to you guys about will be super valuable to you in your career as data scientists, in your career working with data. Because so much of being impactful with data and being impactful, and I do mean this, impactful in the world going forward, is not being able to build a better model or creating a better algorithms than someone else. It's actually being able to take that information and communicate it and sell it and actually help companies and help people make decisions with that data. So I'm going to tell you some stories that may or may not have great technical roots, but it will have hopefully great life lessons or business lessons to them. So my defining moment that I always talk about was when I was 21 years old. And I had just learned this Blackjack system, okay? And everything that we did, every decision that we made at the Blackjack tables was subject to something called conditional probability, meaning what you see impacts what you're going to see, right? Blackjack is really the only game in the casino that has that aspect to it. Every other game, like roulette, like all those other games, they don't. Like poker does to some degree, but poker has human interaction that actually makes it more difficult. But Blackjack is this closed system where what you see impacts what you're going to see. You can model it perfectly. I always like to say it was big data before there was this even term, because Blackjack was simulated out millions of times before people knew what to do. So every decision you make can be governed by math. So I walk up to a Blackjack table at Caesar's Palace. I'm about 6 months into my Blackjack career. Every decision I make is objective, not subjective. I walk up to the table and I bet 2 hands of $10,000. And on the first hand, I get a pair of 9s. On the second one, I get 11, and the dealer has a 5 up. So how many of you guys play Blackjack know what I'm supposed to do here? Pair of 9s against a 5, what do? I need a split. So I put down another $10,000, and I get to play each 9 separately. On the first 9, I get a 2 to make 11. What do I need to do? Double down. So I do. I put another $10,000 down, and I get I get an 8 to make 19. And then on the next 9 I hit, and I get a jack to make 19, and the 11 against the 5, what do I do? I need to double down again, which means I put another $10,000 down, all right, and I get another 8 on that to make 19. So I have 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5. Okay, how much money do I have on the table? $50,000. Thank God you guys got that. Like, when I speak a lot and tell this story a lot, and always people are like, oh, $30,000 or $40,000. And then I spoke at the National Accountants Association. And I was so excited. I'm like, you guys of all people are going to be able to get this. And they were all like, 30,000, 40,000. I was like, no shit why our country's in a deficit. So anyways, we got 18, 18, 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 5. Dealer flips a 6 to make 11, and then gets a king to make 21. I lose $50,000. This woman behind me shrieks, oh my God, that's my entire mortgage. And I want to turn around and go, where the hell do you live? Because where we live in San Francisco, that's a cardboard box in the Tenderloin. So the math, and again, like everything is objective here, the math now calls for me to bet 3 hands of $10,000. And this is one of those moments that you wonder, like, how did I get here? Because certainly, like, the recency bias of losing those hands makes me doubt. Like, the emotion makes me doubt. And the only way to get through something like this is to be really data-driven. But I remember that this was one of those moments that I sort of reflect on how I got here. So I graduated from MIT in 1994 with a mechanical engineering degree that I've never used in my life. It makes my parents really happy. I went on to work in finance. So back in those days, kids weren't going into startups. They were going into finance if they didn't want to do engineering. And I went and worked on the Chicago Board of Options Exchange. And then I started getting into the whole internet thing, and everything was going on there. I moved back to Boston, learned how to program, and ended up starting 4 different companies. The first one was a company that did golf content, instructional content. Another was a fintech company that before fintech was actually even a term. Then I did a sports media startup that we sold to Yahoo. The Circle Lending, the fintech company, we sold to Richard Branson at Virgin. The golf company we sold to Demand Media. And then most recently, I started a company called 10Xer. And so actually, like, I'm going to see how this joke travels. I like to talk about Al Gore, and obviously, we all know the Al Gore internet joke. But you can say Al Gore's invented 2 things, one good, one bad. He invented the internet, which was good for all of us. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And then he invented global warming, which has been bad for us. So usually it's hit or miss joke, but I like it. Anyway, so we go back to this 10Xer that I started, and this is kind of like how I got into the whole world of data. The book Moneyball came out, and I was super excited about the idea of taking what we did in the blackjack world and trying to use it in the world of sports and trying to actually see if there were ways to make sort of like every kind of decision data-driven, specifically around modeling human behavior, like human performance, because that's kind of what they were doing in Moneyball. And then 10Xer, the company I started, we were trying to actually use data to reinvent human capital management, or HR. So the idea of it was, can you talk about or can you understand someone by the data you pull out of GitHub, or the data you pull out of Jira, or the data you pull out of Pivotal Tracker? Can that tell you something about that person's work habits? Can that tell you about how they're doing or how they're trending? And the simplest example of this is, imagine that you have, a median number of commits that someone does each week. And all of a sudden you have a 3 standard deviation event or 2 standard deviation in one direction or the other. Probably something is going on with that person. Maybe they're just on vacation, or maybe they're struggling at home, but at least there's a small signal there from the data. So that was the goal of 10Xer. We worked on it for a few years. We pitched the idea to make Twitter a customer of what we were doing. Twitter liked what we were doing so much, they said, hey, why don't you guys just come build this here? So we got acquired by Twitter about a year ago, and since then I've been working at Twitter, leading and working with some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, a group called Business Insights that's trying to drive data-driven decision-making all around Twitter. And it's super exciting. I love it. I love Twitter. I love this work environment. And I love how smart the people are that work here. So let's just go back and talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned from my experiences at Blackjack. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think makes both people and teams impactful in data science. And then we'll bring on Ryan. So the first thing I think is really important about being data-driven is this idea of overcoming cognitive biases. So those of you guys that have seen 21, you know that I'm in the movie, right? I play a dealer named Jeffrey. The guy that plays me walks up to me and says, "My brother from another mother, Jeffrey." There's a funny bit. This is ringing no bells to you people, is this? Well, if you want to go back and watch it, it's at about 59 minutes and 3 seconds. So this wonderful scene that none of you guys seem to remember, it took 3 days to film. But I always had this up here as kind of like a funny reminder of being in the movie. But then to talk about one of the most difficult decisions I ever made at the blackjack table. So those of you guys that play blackjack, have you ever split tens? Raise your hand if you've ever split tens. Okay, you guys are all welcome at my casino in the future. Unless you're really counting cards and you're a good card counter, there's no reason to split tens. But imagine that blackjack, or sort of card counting, is tracking how many tens, face cards, and aces remain in the deck versus how many low cards. And imagine that you know almost every card you haven't seen, so every card remaining is a 10, a face card, or an ace. And you have a pair of tens, and the dealer has a 6 showing. At that point, do you think you should split tens? Maybe. You have a higher expected value, right? So splitting tens is something you learn eventually as you progress in your blackjack career, and it's a little bit more of an advanced skill. So I rolled up, just learned this, to a table at MGM Grand in Las Vegas, bet 2 hands of $8,000, and the dealer gives me a blackjack on the first one, pair of tens on the second one. The dealer has a 6 up. So I'm looking at this, and I'm scanning the cards on the table, and I go, holy shit, I'm supposed to split these. But the dealer pays my blackjack, gives me $12,000, and then starts to go buy my pair of tens, because what idiot is going to split tens with $8,000 on the table? I looked at her, I said, "Ma'am, I think I want to split these." And she said, "You want to what, those?" And I said, "I think I want to." And as I looked at her, I'm like, man, I don't really want to split these. And I started thinking about why that was, and I realized that as I looked around this table, as I looked around the people now who are gathering around the table, that everyone there thinks I'm a moron if I split these tens. They think I'm an idiot, and if I do, it's going to create a lot of conflict. Like, people are going to hate me, they're going to yell at me, they're going to say I'm ruining the cards, all this crap, right? They're just going to make me uncomfortable. Okay, but what's happening there? I'm falling for something called groupthink. Okay, where I'm being influenced, I'm making a decision based on avoiding conflict. And anytime you do that, you're going to make a bad decision. And if you think about our role as data scientists or as data leaders and as people that are on the cutting edge of technology, you're going to make decisions that they wouldn't have made a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So you're going to make very unpopular decisions all the time. And if you're afraid of conflict, you're never going to be able to innovate. So overcoming groupthink is an important part of innovation or fostering innovation. So I'm like, all right, I don't give a shit what any of these people say, but I still don't want to split these tens. And I'm wondering to myself, why do I still not want to split those tens? And I realize it's because I have 20, I have $8,000, and in my mind, I've already chalked up an $8,000 win. But what am I falling for there? Loss aversion, right? I'm basically fearing a loss more than I am the gain that I'm going to get from that. I'm making a decision to avoid losing. And this is something that causes us to make bad decisions all the time. When I first moved out to Silicon Valley in the mid-2000s, there was a company called Apple that was trading for about 60. And my buddies and all were like, oh, Apple stock, we got to buy this. We use the products, it's great. Well, this is totally underpriced. 11 months later, it went to 120. And my buddies are all like, sell our Apple. I said, why? And they said, well, it just doubled. We don't want to be greedy. Do you think Apple's a buy or sell at 120? Well, actually, we kind of still think it's a buy, but we don't want to be greedy. We don't want to lose any of the money we made. That decision to buy or sell Apple should have nothing to do with where you bought it or anything. It should have to do with where else you could put your money, what your other alternatives are. You shouldn't be worried about losing, right? There's another company in the Valley that we don't like to talk about at Twitter called Facebook. I'm just kidding. We love Facebook. And I've spoken twice at Facebook. And the second time I spoke at Facebook was the day they announced. So the first time I spoke there they had 30 million users. The second time I spoke there was the day they announced their 500 millionth user. And when I was sitting there talking to them, I went through this story, and I said, you guys are a perfect example. Now that you are an established company with 500 million users, are you going to take the same kind of, and before the words were even out of my mouth, an executive from the back row named Chamath screamed, "Hell yeah!" And what he was saying is he knew that for them to continue to grow, they would have to continue to take risks. And I think buying Instagram, for $1 billion, which doesn't seem like a risk at all now, but WhatsApp for $19 billion, Oculus for $2 billion, they've been willing to take risks. And that's one of the reasons they've been so successful. So I can't fall for loss aversion. I got to go in and I got to actually make this decision. I put down another $8,000 down. I said I'm going to split these. She gives me an ace on one, gives me a 9 on the other. So I have 19 and 21. Dealer flips flips a 10 to make 16, and then gets another 10 to make 26. I win my $16,000. I grab the money, walk away from the table, mostly because everyone at the table now wants to kill me. But making that decision, I think, was an important part in sort of understanding loss aversion and overcoming groupthink. And hopefully those are two stories that you guys can think about as you think about making better decisions or explaining to people you work with how to make better decisions. So let's talk about making an impact with data science. The first thing I want to talk about, and this sounds stupid, is that, it starts with the data. Okay? And at Twitter, all right, we complain a lot because our data is in places that are difficult to get to and because it requires a very challenging language to get to it often. And a lot of data scientists don't come in here with great knowledge of scalding, so you got to it takes some real guts to start getting it. And if you can't get to the data, you're not going to answer any questions. But the reason that's true is because Twitter has so much data. And so if you can unlock that, there's so much value to that, right? So, but everywhere, every time, everything you do in data science starts with data. And sometimes that data isn't clean. Sometimes that data isn't even collected. And as simple as it sounds, you have to embrace the idea that the data, the building blocks, that's the building blocks of how you're going to be successful as a data scientist. Getting access to the best data. Let me give you an example of this. So how many of you guys are football fans here? NFL fans, okay? Either there's not a lot of football fans here or no one's really willing to raise their hand. But basically, there was a movie that came out a while ago called The Blind Side, and there was a book by a guy named Michael Lewis. And what the story was essentially that the offense, one of the stories and themes in the book was there's this position in football called offensive left tackle that is the second highest paid position in the league behind quarterback. Okay? And there's no stats that tell you who's the best left tackle in the league. None. I could ask people in this room, well, how would you judge it? And everyone would come up with reason, like stats, and they could be completely flawed. There was an executive who was running a team at the time who was a GSB graduate, very successful, very analytical, looked at this and said, I don't like this. Let's figure this out. So we went and talked to people, like coaches and scouts and things like that, and asked them, what do offensive left tackles do on every play? And what he ended up doing was created this decision tree where at the end he had all these different outcomes, good and bad, for what an offensive tackle could do on any play. And then he hired coaches, paid them in tickets, high school coaches, to sit and watch game film and create statistics about offensive left tackles. And that's the same thing as hiring a bunch of people on Mechanical Turk to hand label some things. Getting to data or embracing the fact that it all starts with data is the most important part of the beginning of gaining advantage in data science. The second thing that I think is really important in a data science team or in any team is this idea of trust. Right? When you think about trust, and when I took over the team here, there were definitely issues where people weren't ready to work together. And you see this all the time. And what you have to understand, and especially when you are an analytics person, you're going to go into situations where people don't trust you because they don't trust the numbers, or you have to get people to trust you. And the way you get people to trust you is to make them understand that you and them have the exact same intentions. You care about the same things. Like you care, like here, the way we do that is like everybody cares about making Twitter successful. And as long as we all believe that we all care about ultimately only one thing, making Twitter successful, every conflict will work out because people trust each other. So developing trust is another big issue. Tackle the most impactful problems. Okay, now this is like a challenging one because like what I like to do with my team is I like to allow them to sort of pick what they work on, right? Allow them to tackle what I believe is to be the most impactful problem. And a lot of times, if you're a support function as a data scientist, people are telling you what to work on, and I don't think that's right. I think you should lead the charge because you look at the data and you know the macro problems. You can figure out what's the most impactful thing to work on. But the caveat with that is if you do that, you're going to have a little bit of chaos. All right, and what I mean by that is you're going to end up working on things and then working on another thing and working on another thing. And if you're good, everyone at the company is going to want you to work on something else. So you have to understand and be okay with that. And a lot of data scientists I know are not okay with chaos, right? They want order and they want things to be very defined. But you have to be okay with basically trying to tackle the most impactful problems. You need to partner with the right stakeholders. And this is really important because when I think about data science, I think about the bottom layer being data, the second layer being analysis, and the third layer being implementation. And implementation can either be you, if you're good and you can go out and you sell your ideas, or you can go and be a product manager, or it can be a stakeholder. And the thing with the stakeholders are they're going to know, they're going to be the ones that give you a lot of value, the ones that help you understand whatever you're in because they're in it every day. When I used to work in sports, I started a company in sports, and we wanted a really good face of our basketball operation. And so we went to this guy, Jerry West. And if any of you guys have ever seen the NBA logo, you know who Jerry West is because the NBA logo is his silhouette. And I sat down across from him in Memphis, and he was a GM at Memphis, and he looked at me and he said, "Boy, I got one thing to tell you. I fucking hate statistics." And I was like, wow, this is going to be a great half hour in Memphis. It's about 120 degrees. Do you know where I could get some barbecue? And after about, I don't know, half an hour together, I learned that he didn't really hate statistics. He hated the way that people used them in basketball. He hated the way that, and this is a quote, that the people thought Allen Iverson was a good basketball player, even though he needed 30 shots to score 30 points. Right? He had a next level understanding of analytics and stats, but he didn't know it. And at the end of the conversation with me, he was like, you know what? I think my scouts should be tracking every deflection that people make. I'm going to make them do that. And you know, this idea that he was like this amazing stakeholder that I could partner with that knew basketball better than I could ever hope to, I had to take that time to work with him and to make him understand what analytics what really was and what statistics really were. So selling or partnering with the right stakeholders is so important. Being practical. And this is the hardest one, I think, for a lot of us is that, like, you know, like we want to build the best models or we want the highest precision, the highest recall. Like we want it to be perfect, right? And I don't know if you guys ever heard a quote by Patton said something to the effect of like a perfect plan, imperfect plan executed perfectly is better than a perfect plan executed imperfectly, right? There were much more complicated blackjack systems than the one we did, but if you did them, and you didn't practice them totally perfectly, you were going to make mistakes. So we knew we could implement ours perfectly, and sometimes the best models are not necessarily the most complicated. They're going to be ones that give you gain, and aren't necessarily, sometimes it might be impracticable to do the most perfect model. So be practical and develop other skills. And what I mean by that is like as important as it is to drive to the truth, you also need to be able to sell what you're doing. And being able to explain and present and sell and work with people and really make what we do should be complicated but should sound simple. The final thing is know that you're not a support function. And the title of my talk, the subtitle was this idea that how data scientists are going to rule the world. And I really, really, really don't believe that data science and analytics should be a support function at a company. I believe it should have a seat at the C level, basically making the CEO make the right decisions, or even being the CEO one day. Because who is better to make decisions? The people that have all the data, or the people that don't have all the data? So I really want to challenge you guys with that one idea, which is like, don't think of yourselves as a support function. Think of yourselves as leaders, as decision leaders, as people that have all the weapons, all the ammunition to make the decisions. Okay, so finally, I know you guys want to know, like, what happened? Did he, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight unless he, well, the end of the story is in my book called The House Advantage, Playing the Odds to Win Big in Business. You can get it on Amazon, and thank you guys. No, I'm just kidding. I'll tell you the end of the story. So, recap, just lost $50,000, got this woman behind me screaming about her house, and the math now calls for me to bet 3 hands of $10,000. So I do. I put 3 hands of $10,000 down, and I know I can do this because I believe in data. I believe in data-driven decision making. All these ideas that I told you about, like I believed at age 21, I really believe this. And so I bet 3 hands of 10,000. I get 9 on the first one, 19 on the second, ace-4 on the third one. So on the 9 against the 6, I got to double down again. So I put another $10,000 down, and I get a queen on that to make 19. Then I got 19 against the 6. I stand that. Ace-4 against the 6, soft 15, is actually another double down hand against the 6. So I double that down, and I get a 4 on that to make 19. So again, 19, 19, 19 against the dealer's 6. I have another $50,000 on the table, a chance to win back everything I just lost or to lose 2 of those women's houses. So again, like, defining moment, only time in my life, like, how did I get here? Like, the only reason I'm here is because I believe, like, religiously in data-driven decision making. So the dealer flips a king to make 16, and then gets a 5 to make 21. So I lose another $50,000. I am crushed. I walk upstairs to my room. Well, I take an elevator upstairs to my room at Caesar's Palace. I collapse on the floor, stare up at the ceiling, wonder why there's a mirror on the ceiling. I'm 21. I'm like, why is there a mirror on the ceiling? So people lie in bed and get ready? That seems weird. And once I get over this tangent, I start thinking about what am I going to do next? And I think about it, and I start thinking about all these ideas about cognitive biases. And I start thinking about, like, okay, well, if I don't play anymore, i.e. I quit this weekend, maybe I'll start playing again. Well, that's subject to something called omission bias, right? Where I'd rather make a bad decision by favoring inaction over action. And then I think about, like, well, if I don't play anymore, I won't lose. Well, that will be being loss averse, right? Which is what we talked about. Like, I can't be afraid to lose. If I don't play, I'm not going to win. And I'm playing a positive expected value game. I know mathematically. So not playing is ultimately a bad decision. And then I started thinking about this whole concept of, results bias or outcome bias. So separating the decision from the outcome. Had I made a good decision and just suffered a poor outcome, or had I made a bad decision? And I was really sure that I made a good decision and just suffered a poor outcome, just gotten unlucky. So I can't be results biased. And finally, I started thinking about, like, holistically, the big picture. And I think this is one of the most important parts of data-driven decision making. You can't be swayed by short-term results. You have to give yourself an opportunity to make this decision millions of times, or to think about this decision in that way. A good example of this is there's a guy, Shane Battier, who played basketball in the NBA. And Shane played at Duke, really smart guy. Michael Lewis also wrote an article about Shane. And Shane goes and speaks at similar events I speak at. And we were at an event one time. And he was talking about teaching LeBron James to be data-driven. And he was talking about guarding Kevin Durant. Because the stats say that when Kevin Durant shoots over his right shoulder, he shot like 60%. When he shoots over his left shoulder, he shoots 40%. So he told LeBron, like, hey, just for this game, I want you to guard LeBron. I want you to guard Durant and make him shoot over his right shoulder. Right? Don't let him shoot over his left shoulder. I said, just for this game. And so he did it. Durant had a terrible game. So LeBron was like, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This data makes a lot of sense. Now, what's the problem with that story, right? It's like, what happens if this is an outlier game where Durant? I mean, you're only talking about maybe 20 shots, right? Where Durant just has a great game. And all of a sudden now that's going to make him not data-driven. So I would never put myself in a situation where my outcome is going to be based on, or my whatever ultimate outcome is only going to be based on 1 or 2 trials. And hopefully you guys never will also. So I went back down and I kept playing. And actually I tell this story a lot. And when I told this story one time at a retreat that a VC, legendary VC in the Valley, Vinod Khosla, was hosting. And the speaker before me that day was the guy by the name of Bill Gates. And so when I walk up there after Bill Gates, I'm like, this is intimidating. All right, and as I'm telling this story at the end of my talk, Vinod, sitting in the front row, who's been on his BlackBerry the whole time, and I was amazed that he had a BlackBerry, first of all. Second of all, I didn't think he was paying attention to me at all. And like he stood up as I got to the story, and he looked at me and he said, I don't believe you. I said, what do you mean? He said, I don't believe you. How could you? And I said, what do you mean? He said, how could you have doubted yourself? How could you have doubted yourself? And I realized that he told me this. He was right. I didn't ever really doubt myself. And I really knew that I was going to go back down and keep playing. And I went back down and I kept playing. And over the next 2 days, I won back the $100,000. The last day I was there, I won $70,000. So I walked away up $70,000 for the weekend. And I do think that that story is really like how I got here today and how I've become such a strong advocate for data-driven decision-making. If I had walked away when I wanted to, I never would have had a movie made about me, a book made about me. I never would have been able to get to meet all you guys here. So hopefully, if you take away one thing, it's this idea, and a lot of you guys hopefully are entrepreneurs and hopefully are going to stay in the Valley and work hard. But when shit gets hard, you got to trust yourself. You got to trust your method. You got to trust your process. And hopefully that's one thing you take away from today. So thank you guys.